panel called Voice, Generation Z and the Black Agenda. It's a specially focused youth panel that is sponsored by Dell, and it's a project that has been in existence since 2005. We'll be talking about that in a short while, but I first actually wanted to get started and introduce ourselves to each other. And I first wanted to introduce our speakers here. We have State Attorney for the City of Baltimore, Marilyn Mosby, who's come all the way this morning to talk to you all. A big round of applause for her. And we also have Rontel Beatty, who is a former CBCF fellow, as well as candidate for the Florida congressional race in the city of Jacksonville. And we'll be hearing more about his background and his lessons as a emerging political leader. And big applause for him as well. I'm not sure if any of you got a chance to read their bios. I wanted really for us to discover a bit about their past and their present and future through their own sort of voices and through their own storytelling. But I will give you a little bit of background on them because it's really helpful to know all the exceptional, inspiring things they've done so far in their lives. So I'll start with State Attorney Mosby here. She was sworn in as the 25th State Attorney for the Baltimore City on Monday, January 5th, 2015, making her the youngest chief prosecutor of any major city in America. A native of inner-city Boston, she's a first-generation college graduate with a BA degree in political science from Tuskegee University and a Juris Doctorate from Boston College Law School. Mosby has been an avid public servant her entire life and has been named one of Baltimore Sun's 50 Women to Watch, both in 2013 and 2014, as well as Baltimore Magazine's Top 40 Under 40 in 2014, and the Daily Record's 2013 Leading Women. In 2015, she was awarded the National Bar Association's Junius W. Williams Young Lawyer of the Year and the National Women's Political Caucus's Woman of Courage Award. She currently resides in West Baltimore with her husband, 7th District Councilman Nick J. Mosby, and her two daughters, I hope I pronounced correctly, Nylin and Anaya. Okay. A bit about Rontel Beatty. He is the principal and CEO of Beatty & Associates, a political consulting firm that focuses on promoting diversity, electing young people to office, and advancing issue-based campaigns. Rontel is also a lobbyist, as well as a former congressional staffer, a CBCF program director and speechwriter, forgot to add that earlier, and also the former congressional candidate for the state of Florida's District 5 in Jacksonville. Rontel received his bachelor's degree in political science from Florida A&M University and a master's in legislative affairs from George Washington University. Okay, so I actually want them to learn about you as well, because this is an invited audience. I'm not sure if you know, you've all been here because we want you to be here. We invited you to be part of this interactive work session, essentially. It's really, think of it as a conversation that you can actually get more key insights and have the opportunity to sort of put your own voice in this conversation about young people in the public space. So what I'm going to do, and I've asked all the student coordinators or teachers that helped you come here this morning to basically introduce you as a group. I'm going to come by with the mic, if I can get assistance from Maurice here. We're going to have you introduce your group, your name of your group, where you've come from today, and a fact about your group. Do it in a casual way here. I'll start with this corner here. It looks like this is the delegation from Richmond. We have a representative, because they're wearing the black shirts with a little lapel there.
Testing 1, 2.
Who wants to speak on behalf of Richmond?
Testing 1, 2.
Please. It's working. Mic's working. You're going to get a mic.
Good afternoon. My name is Jawan Davis. I'm the youth mayor for the city of Richmond, representing the Mayor's Youth Academy program and the youth justice program that we have in Richmond. One of my questions was...
Hold on the questions. We're going to get to that in a second. But okay. Fantastic. I'm so glad you're ready. Just wanted to hear about you. No, I don't want to. Thank you. Applause for Okay. Next, we'll talk to Dunbar High School. I think it's sitting right next to you.
Excuse me. My name is Zaria Boyd. I'm representing the Eleanor Holmes Norton Law and Public Policy Academy from Dunbar. And you said one fact, right?
Yeah.
I guess I don't know, we're all in 11th grade. That's the fact.
Okay. Behind you is Liberty's Promise, so I'll go ahead and I think have you speak.
Hello, my name is Yennefer Amaya, and we're representing the AP Literature class from Roosevelt Senior High School.
Great. Thank you. The state, Roosevelt, so that's D.C., that's Washington, D.C.
Dunbar.
And Dunbar's D.C. and Richmond,
We have them in
Virginia. Well, we're going to come to Baltimore in a second. So we have representation from Roosevelt, awesome. What about Eleanor Holmes Norton Academy for Law and Policy? I know they're in the room here too. They're at the table here.
They went.
An introduction.
She did.
Oh, I'm sorry. Confusing things. Okay, the last group, I believe, if I'm not missing, now two more groups. We have Liberty's Promise. Where's Liberty's Promise in the room? Great. Okay. And Liberty's Promise is they'll tell us where you are too. It's important to know.
Hello, I'm Arlene Siansapor. We're representing Liberty's Promise from Patterson in Baltimore, Bladensburg in Prince George's County, and West Potomac High School in Alexandria, Virginia.
And please share us a little bit about what you do as an organization, because you're not a conventional student group.
We're an after-school program for immigrant youth or youth with immigrant family background. Yeah, and we're all seniors.
Awesome. And last but not least, we have a delegation here from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum who's sitting at the front right here. They can introduce themselves and where they're from, because they come from far away.
Hi, my name is Aidan, and I'm going to be representing the Holocaust Museum. We're actually from Israel, and we're in a program called Israel at Heart, and yeah, that's it.
Sorry. My name is Taj, and together with the delegation from Holocaust Memorial, we are representing African students in Israel. So we are also visiting DC, and we're glad to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Round of applause for them, too. Okay. I hope I didn't miss anyone, but we're all happy you're here. We did. Okay.
Hi. I'm sorry, you didn't miss us. That's Roosevelt AP, and this is Roosevelt regular English.
Okay.
Okay. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Both. Okay. Fantastic. A bit about myself and a bit about what AVOICE does. You see what we have in the background here is a bit of slides about what the program's about. It's been around since 2005, and it's basically the largest online digital archives that capture Black legislative behavior in the United States of House of Representatives. It's basically about the history of the CBC and how they've come to represent the Black agenda since 1971. I would encourage you to take a look at it later. Essentially, it's a resource guide for your classes, for learning more about policy areas that affect you and matter to you, and a way to understand how leaders emerge from these very unique and different backgrounds, some perhaps very surprising. So you all see them in Congress, you see them on TV, but they all had really humble and beginnings that were informed by their personal struggles and inspirations. And that's what we're hoping to learn about today as well. So I want to jump right into this amazingly dynamic town hall that we just came from. It was dynamic, wasn't it? I think we were all inspired. We definitely have a lot of takeaways from that. And I really wanted to spend a few minutes essentially kind of reporting out to each other and to our speakers who may or may not have attended to the National Town Hall. Essentially, what are some questions you might have from the town hall that the speakers up here can reflect on? And we have actually a great question from Richmond about this. And I want to go ahead and give the mic to Richmond here. Basically a question about the town hall, about being motivated in public life. All right. I don't know where the mic went. I guess I don't know where the mic is now, so we're just going to have to lift our voice.
My question was, how do you stay motivated and work through the challenges of being outnumbered and overwhelmed in the election office?
Did both of you hear that? Yeah, I could repeat it. Great. So for the audience, though, if you didn't all hear that, basically, how do you stay motivated and work through the challenges of being overwhelmed and outnumbered? So I'll first direct it to State Attorney here about that.
So I guess I'll give you a little bit of background. First and foremost, what I understand and what I recognize is that it's greater than me individually, right? It's about what I represent. And so that's what keeps me really grounded. That's what motivates me. I am the state's attorney for Baltimore City. I'm a young black woman. But when you think about prosecutors, right? Prosecutors, it's an important role within the criminal justice system. Prosecutors are the ones who decide who's going to be charged, what they're going to be charged with, what sentence recommendations they're going to make. You know, it's one of the most integral roles in the criminal justice system. And when you look at the disproportionate impact that the criminal justice system has had on communities of color, you cannot ignore the fact that 95% of the prosecutors in this country are white, 79% are white men, and as a woman of color, I represent 1%. 1% of all elected prosecutors in the country. So when you think about that fact, right, I can remember when after I beat an incumbent that outraised me by I beat him by double-digit percentage points, but he raised more than $1 million. And I was thankfully able to be successful. The magnitude of my race didn't really hit me until I was in the community and a little 8-year-old girl walked up to me and said, "Marilyn Mosby, I voted for you." And I looked at this baby who clearly didn't vote, but somebody had explained that fundamental right to her. And what was more important in that moment was that she could see herself in me. She's not used to doing that. And so that's when I understood that it's greater than me individually. And so that's what motivates me. Besides the fact that, you know, in the city of Baltimore, we prosecute about 40,000 cases a year. I live in the heart of West Baltimore. I have 2 little girls. And so when you think about the motivation in trying to keep our communities safe, but also ensuring that we're bringing reform to a criminal justice system that, again, has disproportionately impacted us, I understand and I recognize that it's greater than me, so I'm willing to make those sacrifices.
Okay. And I'll piggyback a little bit off of that. I think the heart of civic participation is devoting yourself to a cause that is greater than you, but personalize it as well. So one of the things that brought me into politics, you ever been to St. Augustine, Florida? Anyone ever heard of it? St. Augustine, Florida is the nation's oldest city. It is inside of the richest county in the state of Florida, but the community I grew up in is the poorest community in the state of Florida. I remember when I was 10 years old, we went to turn the water faucet on and there was orange water coming out of the spouts. We were on a boil water alert for, I don't even know how long. But I looked around, we didn't have any elected officials that looked like us except for a black congresswoman out of Jacksonville, Congresswoman Brown. Somehow word got to her that the black residents on the west side of St. Augustine did not have clean drinking water for weeks. She came down, she saw the conditions, and she went back to DC and then brought a coalition of members of Congress down with her. She brought the governor from Tallahassee, and they walked the streets and they talked to the residents and showed them the water.
About a week later, we had clean running water. Now, I didn't know a whole lot about politics at the time, nor did I care. All I knew was some powerful woman came into my community, and within a week of her being there, we had clean water. Fast forward to me actually getting into politics. When times get tough, I think about the time that we were without clean water. And it's bigger than clean water. Our communities are plagued with so many issues. And when you're faced with, as you mentioned, overwhelming challenges or overwhelming numbers, you got to remember that there are people depending on your commitment to a cause greater than oneself. That's how I stay motivated in the face of all of this that we see going on today. And I also lean on mentors and know that you're not alone. There are so many other people who are fighting for the same things you're fighting for, and it's okay to band together. And what I've also learned, and I'll get spiritual for a second, it's always darkest before morning. So stay with the fight and know that a brighter day awaits. Thank you.
We also had a question from Dunbar High School about specifically the topic of today's town hall, which was essentially the role of Black women in politics today, and how we can really draw from that as inspiration and as real action. And I wanted to, actually, this is really more of a question for City Attorney, but because she's probably encountered some of this in her political career, or her public career. And essentially, I'll let you go ahead and ask the question about stereotypes, and women, specifically Black women stereotypes. If you could hear from them, please.
We say, how can we dispel the stereotype of the angry Black woman in today's age?
So the one thing I can say about this is I think that this stereotype is rather, it's an intentional sort of construct to trivialize the passion that Black women have in doing the work for our people. So I don't have to be validated by anybody, right? So at the end of the day, I know who I am and whose I am. And what I mean by that is that in the end, I'm not looking for anybody's validation. Do I have a right to be angry as a Black woman when I think about the inequities within the educational system? Do I have a right to be angry when I think about the fact that you can get a gun before you can get a job in certain communities? Do I have the right to be angry by so many of the inequities within our communities? The fact that there are two standards of justice for those within our community that may come from a different zip code or have not make enough money. Those are reasons to be angry. But I think the way that you dispel that is through leadership, right? And one of the things that a lot of folks, when I was thrust into the international spotlight with the prosecution of the Freddie Gray case, I can tell you that 3 months into my term, there was a 25-year-old innocent Black man who made eye contact with police, who was unconstitutionally arrested, was placed head first, feet shackled and handcuffed into a metal wagon, and his pleas for medical attention after he partially severed his spine were ignored. I followed the facts with the law, and I wouldn't do anything differently. And that projection that I was somehow angry about charging 3 Black officers and 3 white officers with a crime that we have more than probable cause to believe that they committed is something that, again, you learn not to internalize, right? It was never about me, it was what I represented. And when you think about the fact that this Black girl had one standard of justice that was applied fairly and equally to everybody, regardless of one's sex, religion, or occupation, that accountability led to exposure. A week after I charged those officers, the Department of Justice came in, exposed the discriminatory policing practices of one of the largest police agencies in the country. That exposure ultimately led to reform. We now have a federally enforceable consent decree that, even despite the federal administration that tried to stop it, is still in existence. And because of that reform, we have a spotlight on the entrenched police corruption of the 8th largest police department in the country. You cannot be defined by anybody else's, stereotypes of who and what you are. You have to be grounded and understand that you have to have the confidence and understand that this is bigger than you individually. Sure.
We have 2 questions from 2 students.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay, so I am one of the leaders in a youth justice program in Richmond, Virginia. In this program, we divert youth from juvenile justice systems, and we basically like hold hearings and try to find like restorative sanctions for them. So my question is, what are other ways we can divert low-level offenders from the criminal justice system?
Is that towards me?
Yes.
Okay. So I've taken a different approach. In addition to having like one standard of justice in the city of Baltimore, which is clearly defined at this point, everybody knows. You prey upon the vulnerabilities of men, women, children, we're gonna hold you accountable, right? You break the law, regardless of your occupation, we're gonna hold you accountable. The other thing that's extremely important in this position is to take a holistic approach. Again, I live in the heart of West Baltimore. You look at my city, and it's not very different than a lot of communities. You were talking about St. Augustine. 24% of Baltimore's population lives in poverty. 35% of children live below poverty. There are over 18,000 vacant houses, 16,000 vacant lots. The unemployment rate for young African-American men between the ages of 18 and 24, which is more than twice as high than that of whites. The median household income for the communities within the city, it's twice as low for African-American families than that of whites. If you don't address those root causes as to why crimes take place, guess what happens? We have a cycle of violence. So I've taken a different approach. I created a crime control and prevention division within my office. We focus on youth specifically. Unfortunately, what's happened last year, I charged twice as many juveniles with attempted murder and murder than almost the past 2 years combined. So what that tells me is that we have to put an intentional sort of focus on young people. We have to ensure that we see them in classrooms as opposed to courtrooms. I have 3 youth programs, and you were talking about diversion, but before I get into the youth programs, I have one program which is called Aim to Be More. It's for first-time, nonviolent felony drug offenders. Why is a prosecutor creating a program like that? We're talking about individuals that are facing 20 years incarceration, right? Because young people, oftentimes, all of us, we think about instant gratification as opposed to thinking long term. And when we go out there, we sell drugs, and you're facing 20 years incarceration, you get that felony conviction, what do you think happens? You can no longer apply for a job. You can no longer apply for housing. You can't go back to school because you can't get any financial aid. And then what other recourse do you have but to go out doing what you were doing in the first place? That's the cycle within our communities, and that's a cycle that I'm attempting to break. So I created this program. It's for first-time nonviolent felony drug offenders. They go through a probationary period where they learn life skills. They learn job training skills. They do community service, and at the end of that probationary period, they're given a job, and their felony records are wiped clean. It's based upon Kamala Harris's Back on Track program. And we have that right in Baltimore. What else can you do? I have a program, it's called Project 17. It started as a pilot program where we are essentially going into Frederick Douglass High School. You guys can remember the young folks in Frederick Douglass during the uprising that were throwing the rocks at the police. They got a really bad rap on national news. Well, they're very talented young folks. And we went into that school, and we went into Renaissance Academy, which is another school in Baltimore, because there was an increase in youth violence. They had experienced a record number of homicides within their 11th and 12th grade classes. So we went into those schools, and we're focusing on 11th and 12th graders that are chronically truant. What does that mean? That means they're not coming to school 50 and 60% of the time. Why is a prosecutor, again, focusing on chronically truant young people? Because if they're not going to school 50 and 60% of the time, where do you think they're going to end up? In the criminal justice system. So what we've been able to do through that program is to connect those young people to small businesses where they then develop entrepreneurship skills, job training skills. And once they get back on track and go into school, because that's the priority, then they're subsequently employed by those small businesses. Those are just 2 examples. I have 3 other youth programs, but I think I'm one of the only prosecutors' offices in the entire country that has an actual youth coordinator that is dedicated out of my office. That has to be a priority.
Okay, did we have another question in response to that? Okay, great, we have one hand up and then,
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Carice James, and my partner.
I'm Benny.
All right. So we represent Roosevelt High School. My question to both of you guys, because it applies to everybody in here, we have all been at an age where we've been minors, under 18, and we all know that change in legislation comes through voting. We can't vote yet. All right. So is there another way that's as effective as voting for those under 18? Like, because we know protesting isn't getting us anywhere. What's the next step? And this is to both of you, whoever wants to answer it.
All right. Well, I want to push back a little bit. I think there's a lot you can do, and protesting does have impacts, as we've seen across the country. And I think about how so many young people have come together under the March for Our Lives umbrella, and they're sparking a lot of conversation on gun reform. Are we where we need to be? No, but the conversation wasn't even occurring. I actually went to a march here in D.C. Had to be dozens of thousands of people there. And, I think that, so first thing, I think protesting can be impactful and can be effective if done properly. But beyond that, I think a lot of legislators, a lot of people in elected office are starting to recognize and understand the influence that young people have, especially those who are teenagers. And I think it's a result of March for Our Lives, because you one day will be 18 in a couple years. So without you knowing it, policymakers are becoming more affluent in tech, to learn how to work their own iPhones, where before they might not have and didn't really care. They're talking about student loan debt reform and how to make college more affordable. You guys are not in college yet, but because young people are talking about it, now legislators are talking about it because they know that you'll be able to vote for them in 2 years. So although you may not be able to cast a ballot now, you still have a voice. And your voice matters, and I don't ever want any young person to think that because they are, not of voting age, that your voice doesn't matter and is not being heard. The other thing I'd say, as a lobbyist, one of the things, I used to work with an organization called AMI Kids. I think they have a program in Richmond, Virginia that actually diverts young people from the court system, but Ms. Mosby answered, her program sounded identical to what AMI Kids did, which is why I didn't chime in. But when I was, advocating for these young people, I would take them on Capitol Hill, I would take them in state legislators across the country, and allow them to tell their stories about why, it was important that schools had wraparound services, why it was important that they had mental health counselors on site to deal with some of the traumas that people from inner cities or underprivileged communities face. I would take young people to talk to legislators and their staff about issues that, why free lunch was important, why it was important that they had after-school activities, why it was important that we put buses in neighborhoods that couldn't transport kids to after-school jobs. So it's never too young for you to connect with organizations that align with your interests. They'll hear you out. And I'll finish by saying this. Just because you can't vote don't mean you can't influence. You will be a voter one day. They will listen to you. And if you want a first step, if you want to know what you should do, tomorrow, I would say find an organization that has a mission statement that aligns with, something you care about. See if you can join. Let them know you want to be involved. Let them know what your interests are. And most organizations with missions like the one I just mentioned, they have advocacy arms. They're talking to their state and local politicians and also their federal ones. And most of them have fly-ins, and most of them have days on the Hill where they'd be happy to take you. So, yeah, don't be discouraged.
So what I would say is every great movement towards progress began with young people. Young people unafraid to challenge the status quo in the pursuit of justice. Young people who understand and recognize that regardless of where you are in your life, that in the words of Harriet Tubman, they're unafraid to reach for the stars and change the world. Like, you gotta understand no situation or circumstance defines your destiny. Only you do. And so what can you do? There's a lot that you can do. Yeah, you're not of age to vote quite yet, but you have power and you have influence over those that can vote. And your presence is something that you can utilize to be an influence. Just as was mentioned with the gun control in this country, that march was incredibly powerful because it was young people standing up and saying, enough is enough. When you look at our history, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, it was young people who got out there and said, enough is enough, right? We're gonna do something. And so I guess my advice would be, rather than just protest, I would suggest that you strategize, you organize, and you implement. You have a group of young people who are actively engaged in this room. Set your agenda and implement. What is it that you're gonna take up? Is it gonna be economics? Is it gonna be public safety? Is it gonna be education? Set your agenda and implement. And you have the power at 17 and 16 to be able to do it. History has shown us that.
Speaking of gun control, something you just mentioned, while there are certain laws that prohibit people from getting guns unlicensed, while taking away guns completely offenses our Second Amendment, and there are people buying guns off the market illegally and piecing them together. What are your thoughts on actually making it strict or making it just hard for people with mental issues or of that sort to get guns and stuff in our community? Because there have been a lot of not only just school shootings, but just mass shootings around in our nation, and we have the highest, mass shootings in the world. So what are your thoughts on making these guns not available for people who aren't equipped to handle them?
Well, I think there's a lot of good policy being floated around, like mental health evaluations, tighter background checks. And of course, I don't think that anyone needs access to high magazine round capabilities. I mean, I'm from Florida. Everyone in my family owns a gun. I was taught how to shoot guns very young. I grew up in the country. Some of our meals were hunted. So with that being said, I've never come into a situation where I felt like I needed a high-powered, gun. And I don't think that the answer is taking guns away entirely, but I think that we need to be promoting responsible purchasing and responsible use of them. And I think that starts a lot of times when people are young. I think one of the things that's being left out of this gun debate is mental health in general, because guns don't grow legs, walk into a room and shoot people. They have owners, and a lot of these people who misuse them, they're dealing with something that caused them, to pull the trigger and take lives senselessly. And I think that I think the gun debate needs to go beyond the actual guns and start talking about the emotional and the mental issues that people are facing and dealing with that causes them to think that the way to deal with their problems is by taking a life.
My perspective about it, and I agree, I think that we need responsible safeguards in place. But I also think the dialogue has to go beyond banning assault rifles, right? Because if you look at a city like Baltimore, and of those young folks that were killed, and it was more than 300 last year in the city of Baltimore, majority of them were killed by handguns. And we're not having that discussion. And I think that we have to put those safeguards in place. And that is a way, as young people, that you can stand up and say, unacceptable. It's not just the assault rifles that are in suburban America that are impacting those suburban communities. It's handguns that are killing these young black boys in urban cities all across this country. What are we doing about that?
And I think, and one other thing we talk about is that on the handgun piece, a lot of them are not registered, a lot of them were not purchased legally, which once again leaves out the people that are dying on our streets. They're completely left out of the conversation. So when policymakers are talking about, increasing background checks and, limiting, assault rifles, well-intentioned, but it doesn't really fix the problem, as Ms. Mosby said, in our communities. My father was shot and killed with a handgun. I have other family members that were shot and wounded with handguns. You know, no one, and you know, I grew up dodging bullets, but not those from an AR-15. You know, it came from 9mm, Glocks. So I completely agree with everything she just said.
The question in the back there. Roosevelt.
My name is Damien. I also attend Roosevelt. With me being a senior this year, I would like to ask, like, with all the betrayal of like us trying to do better for ourselves and make it out so that we can be better as a whole and defeat this, I don't really know how to say it, like the status quo of us not really trying to go nowhere but graduating high school, being high school dropouts just to be in the street. With all this stuff that we see that's negative, how could we go the opposite route and be positive to actually beat that status quo?
So what I would say is what I just said to the young man, like no situation or circumstance can define your destiny. Only you and God can do that, right? Like at the end of the day, that should be your motivation, your situation, your circumstance. For me, I'll tell you a little bit about my background so that you understand why I'm so passionate about the work that I do. When I was about 14 years old, I come from 4 generations of police officers. My grandmother, my grandfather, my father, my mother, and my grandfather was one of the founding members of the first black police organization in Massachusetts. So law enforcement was very much instilled. And even in the city of Boston, right, in the urban city of Dorchester, you're not shielded from the violence that plagues our communities. At 14 years old, my cousin who lived right next door to me, we grew up like brother and sister. His dad is a police officer. My mom is a police officer. He was killed right outside of our home in broad daylight when he was mistaken as a neighborhood drug dealer. He was really an honor student with all these dreams, all these aspirations of going on to be an architect and going on to college. It's, to this day, is an image that is branded in my mind because I opened up the door and I seen him laying dead in the streets. If it wasn't for my neighbor who cooperated with police and testified in court, my family wouldn't have received any sort of justice. But that was my first introduction to the criminal justice system, and having to walk into a courtroom and seeing the number of African American men coming in and out in chains and shackles impacted me. I had my cousin with all these dreams and aspirations who's now going to a grave. The individual responsible for his death was also 17 years old. And I wanted to know how we could have gotten to that young man before he elected to take my cousin's life. And see, that painful, traumatic sort of experience is what spawned my passion to want to change this system. What is this system that is disproportionately impacting us? Why are we so complacent with seeing young black men being slaughtered in the streets? That's what inspired me to want to change it, to be that I had to get up every day and I was bused an hour out of the inner city of Massachusetts to one of the richest towns in Massachusetts, where when I first started in the 2nd grade, I was the only black child in the entire school. I didn't get home until 6 o'clock at night. I was the positive representation of all black women and all black people because the only sort of perspective that they had came through the negative light of the media and through me. No situation or circumstance can define your destiny, and those traumatic experiences, your life experiences, are what's going to help define who you are. And so what can you do to negate or to defy anybody's expectations of you? Believe in yourself. I felt like I could be the state's attorney for Baltimore City. They told me I was too young, I was too inexperienced, I couldn't raise enough money, that me running against a powerful white male incumbent would not only interrupt my career, but would potentially destroy my husband's career. I had to believe in myself. I had to negate the haters and the naysayers, right? And shake them off. You gotta believe in yourself and you gotta motivate yourself. And I use my traumatic experience to spawn my passion to reform the criminal justice system, and you can do the same thing.
Wow. Yeah, I was going to say the very same thing. So by now you know that my father died from a gunshot, but I'll go a little deeper. I don't think he got past the 8th grade. He was a cocaine dealer, and he eventually got so big that he got targeted in a drive-by, and he died before I turned 2 years old. this morning, me and my fiance are talking, because today is my 30th birthday, and we were talking about how my father didn't make it to see 30. I had every excuse and every reason to not see 30, because I grew up in the same community that he grew up in. The same people he sold to were the same people that tried to recruit me to those very same corners. So much so that my grandmother had to walk me to the bus stop every day just so that to keep me out of trouble. I remember one swinging a machete at my mother for trying to protect me and keep me out of that game. I remember, and then when you're growing up poor and you're the oldest of your mother's sons, and you don't have, there's holes in your roof and there's termites falling out your ceiling, and you don't have central heating, in cold winters, and you don't have air conditioning in 100-degree Florida heat. And your mother is, struggling to put food on the table. There's a lot of pressure on you to make mistakes and maybe just take an easier route. But I saw where it got my father, and I had a bunch of uncles who didn't die but spent more than 30 years combined in prison. So I knew that I didn't want to go that route. So I basically decided, I looked in the mirror one day, and I may not be a positive reflection on my entire community, but I want to look in the mirror to see a positive reflection of myself. So I controlled the things that I could control. I played football for 8 years. I did everything positive I can think of. I played football for 8 years. I joined the weightlifting team. I ran track. I joined JROTC. I focused on my grades, and not only that, I worked 60 hours a week, washing dishes at CC's Pizza, cutting grass at the National Guard. I delivered mail through the United States Postal Service on Saturdays and Sundays. I bagged groceries at public supermarkets. I did everything I could that I knew wouldn't land me in an early grave or in a jail cell. And it got pretty repetitive. I had done that. I started working at 12 years old under the table because it wasn't legal. They had to pay me in cash out the register. And just when I began to think around 16 or 17 years old that, I don't know what this is going to take me. When you plant seeds of positivity, eventually they will grow and you will reap, a bountiful harvest. So that came for me in the form of a full scholarship to Florida A&M University. And I showed up at Florida A&M with Jabos, gold teeth in the bottom, a white T-shirt that was about 10 sizes too big, because I was from the neighborhood. But, I was going to college. And when I got there, I happened to run into 4 seniors who were, members of a fraternity called Alpha Phi Alpha. And they had heard me talking to some students. They say, "Hey, you're pretty articulate. We love your story. You should consider running for freshman class president." Where I come from, student government was not cool. It was one of the last things you want to do. You'd have to fight every day for being class president. But I'm in college now. I was like, well, you know what? Taking a different route got me this far. Maybe I should run for class president. Those same guys took me to JCPenney, bought me the 2 for $20, dress shirts, and we went to Ross and they bought me the suits, and I ran for class president and I won. Right, I won. I had no idea I would win. And FAMU was a very political school. I had to raise about $10,000 just to run and win. From there, I realized that wow, I have leadership capabilities. I found something that I was good at. So I changed my major to political science, and then that turned into okay, well, I've done student government. Maybe I should take it a step further and get an internship. Tallahassee is the Florida state capital. You can't go to FAMU without seeing that tall building on the hill. So then I started interning for the governor. And then that landed me my first internship here in Washington, D.C. through the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And when I got here, I happened to have been fortunate enough to be featured in an Ebony spread where they interviewed 7 interns of color. So when I got back to Tallahassee and the Ebony magazine is all over campus, that allowed me to get my first speech writing job in the Florida House of Representatives, and I was only 21 years old. I was still in college. And when I got that job, it was my first paid job, not bagging groceries or washing dishes, but it made me think about how just 4 years before that, I had no idea what I would be doing. I just knew I wanted to do something positive. And it kind of was the result of me doing all these humble things. Being positive it doesn't mean, you know, you have to start off extravagant and you got to start off on top. For me, being positive just started off washing dishes and decided not to go, you know, this route that landed my father in the grave or this route that, you know, sent my uncles to prison. So.
I want to start off by saying happy birthday. And,
thank you.
I'm singing for
and
you.
I'm from Richmond, Virginia. My name is Corey, and my question is, what are your standards on freedom and equality? Is freedom and equality even attainable now in this day and age, in your opinion?
You want to start?
Is it attainable? Yeah, I would say it's attainable because we work towards it every day. Our ancestors have been fighting for it. We fight for it. You should fight for it. And I think that if we don't fight for it, then we're doing a tremendous disservice, and not only ourselves, but those that come behind us. And I believe that you know, leadership is always you know, setting an example and leaving the world in a better place than where you found it. Now, the current state of freedom and equality, yeah, we're free. We're not wearing, you know, shackles. We're not enslaved like our ancestors were. But there's a lot of structural racism that exists that suppresses and oppresses people of color, suppresses and oppresses women in particular. And I'm actually a labor lobbyist now, so I actually lobby a lot of issues that pertain to exactly what you just asked. For instance, and she touched on it earlier, one of my areas of expertise now as a lobbyist is criminal justice on a federal level. And have you ever heard of ban the box?
Yep.
So, as you know, if you go to jail, especially if you commit a felony, when you get out and you go to, you know, fill out an application, even not even just getting a job, if you want to go to college, they're still going to ask you, have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime? And they use that a lot of times as a basis for admitting you into their school or giving you a job. They consider you less trustworthy or incapable of you know, succeeding in whatever job you're applying. Sometimes they want to do it just to filter you out. So one of the things that ban the box does is that it removes that question from the application until an offer has been made. So that was done with the intent of, you know, allowing people to judge you based upon your qualifications. I say all that to say, and there's many more issues like you know, ban the box, but that structural racism is huge, and just because the issue is so vast and sometimes seems insurmountable, it doesn't mean that we can afford to not fight and chip away at it. Ban the box, for instance, is the first step towards ensuring that, you know, people who may have had a negative interaction with the criminal justice system, you know, can have the means to support themselves or, you know, a second chance in life. One other thing I'll mention that I'm still working on, it'll actually be introduced next month. A year and a half ago, I had this idea that we should work to remove barriers to get occupational licenses for those with criminal convictions. I got a lot of family that's been in prison, but one in particular, one guy in particular, his story really stuck to me because he did 10 years, and he was a prison barber. He got his certification inside. He was a great barber. That was his job. He got out and happened to be living in a state that would not grant him a barber's license as a result of his conviction. Ain't that crazy? He's skilled in the trade. That's been his job for the last 10 years. He had a certification on the inside, but he couldn't make a living upon his return doing something he knew and something he was so good at. And there's over 3,000 occupations nationwide that states won't allow you to get an occupational license if you've been arrested or convicted of a crime. This bill would basically remove those barriers so that, you know, if you got a certification or you're interested in being a barber or a personal trainer, or you want to open a landscaping business, or you want to be a nail tech, this bill would allow you to pursue that dream and not hold your past against you. So the current state of equality and freedom is very unstable, but there are good people working towards it every day. You got to be one of them. We all got to be one of them.
So the way I would say, what is equality and freedom? I just came from Haiti about 2 weeks ago. And this is a beautiful country that fought for their liberation and is economically disadvantaged because they fought for their liberation. But the thing that really stuck out for me in going to Haiti is that I garnered an appreciation for the freedom that we have here in America. The economic freedom, the freedom to have opportunities and to make the most. Like, you can be the poorest person in one of the poorest communities and still make something out of yourself in America. Whereas you look at other countries and they don't have the opportunity to be able to do so. So that's something that I garnered an appreciation for living here. But what I also understand and what I also recognize that living in America, that there are so many structural, sort of systemic inequalities, racial inequalities, right, that are based upon white supremacy. And a lot of the issues, even worldwide, are still based upon white supremacy. But what can you do about it? This is where I appreciate the word freedom, because you have the ability of changing those inequalities. You have the ability of having a seat at the table. What is the importance of that? Structural and systemic reform comes from within, right? I'll just use my position. I talked about how I represent 1% of all elected prosecutors in the country. Having a seat at that table, I can now hold everybody to one standard of justice when it comes to police accountability. I can now ensure that I'm making an investment in young people just from having a seat at the table. I can have a voice and have a platform to ensure that this system is more equal for my community, right? So I think that is where freedom is something that we have to appreciate, because with that freedom, you have the ability of actually reforming and changing those inequalities within America.
Okay, fantastic. Those are really inspiring words. I want to make sure, just a little note about how we're doing the Q&A here. I want to make sure all groups can get a chance to participate. So we'll hear one more question, not one more, a question from Richmond, and then we're going to go direct it to Dunbar and Liberty's Promise. And if you have any, make it easy on us. Raise your hand. If you can't, write a note, and I can relay it here to our speakers. So, don't be shy. Okay.
Okay, my question is, how can us youth be positive and push through all the hurt and fear of us being the next target for law enforcement or even our own race? How can you help us? Like, what ways would you give us, or motives?
So repeat the question for me.
I said, how can you help us youth be positive and push through all the hurt and fear of us being the next target for law enforcement or even our own race?
So again, I think it's tapping into your situation and your circumstance and not allowing that to define you. I think you all have to utilize your experiences to find your passion. And so once you're able to do that, there's nothing that you can't do. You cannot allow other people to define the parameters of who you are and what you are, right? Because if that's the case, then none of us would be in these positions. They said I'm too young, too inexperienced. I wouldn't be here if I allowed other people to define who I am. So it's understanding that you got to think long term. You can't think instant gratification, and it's easy when you're a young person to think about today and not tomorrow. Your game plan has to be your end result. And one of the things, when I think about like my experience, I knew I wanted to be an attorney. I didn't know what type of attorney I wanted to be, right? And I can remember interning when I got into law school, and my colleagues were making $40,000 a summer, right? Working in these big, large corporate law firms. And I was so impassioned to make a difference that I wanted to bolster my experience. And I volunteered my time. I was constantly thinking long term, not instant gratification, because clearly I ain't getting no money. I need a stipend to get me through this summer. I volunteered my time in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston. I worked here in D.C. in the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. I worked for the Suffolk County Homicide Unit. I did all of these experiences where I wasn't getting paid, and I could have easily taken the corporate route, and I could have been paid. But it was a long-term game for me. I am now, as the state attorney for Baltimore City, the highest paid elected official in the state of Maryland. It was a long-term game. And what you gotta understand is that when you have that passion, money's gonna come, right? And so I just say that to say, that's what should inspire you. Only you can do that. Only you and God can do that. Nothing or nobody else can do it. Only you, and it starts with each and every one of you.
How old are you, bro? 17? Is this Dunbar? Are you Keyshawn? Hey, good seeing you, man. Keyshawn used to play football on the team I coach, so I've been staring at him all morning. I'm like, he's like at least a foot taller now. But to answer your question, it is a very difficult question. And it reminds me of my high school graduation day. We had a cookout at one of my grandmother's house, and you know the black community in St. Augustine is very, very small. Everybody know everybody. We had some speakers, had a grill going, and in Florida, it ain't nothing like up here. You know, no parking regulations. You park on the grass, park on the sidewalk, park in the ditch. It don't matter. So there's a bunch of cars parked on the side of the road. You know, people like to sit in the cars, play their own music, basketball hoops. You know, so there's probably about 80 people there, and they were celebrating me and my 6 cousins, because we were all going to college on full scholarships. Me, academic ride, and my other 6 were playing Division I football. And I remember like it was yesterday. I was 18 years old, about to go to college, and an undercover police officer rolled through the street with his windows down. And we knew who he was. His last name is Manusi, and he had that family has a very troubled history with the FBI. There's actually a couple documentaries on this family, I think on Netflix or Hulu or something like that. But so when we saw him, everybody sort of felt uneasy. Within 5 minutes, there were 9 cop cars coming from this way, 9 cop cars coming from this way. They jumped out in full tactical gear, K9s, automatic rifles, and they came and asked whose home it was. Grandmother said, "It's mine. We have a permit. These kids are going to college. We're just having a barbecue. Well, we need you to shut it down." "Why, officer?" So they're going back and forth, and the officer basically, they all started moving onto the property, and they eventually unleashed their K9s. So now the K9s are running wild. And I literally remember my cousin, he played DN, and he was going to play football, I think, up in Colorado. 2 K9s came and ripped his hamstrings off. And then I had another cousin standing to the right of me. We seeing this dog go crazy on my cousin's legs, he walks off. He's like, "I'm out of here." Before he can walk 3 steps, there was a taser to his back. He was on the ground. I'm like, oh. So now I'm the only one left standing. And I'm looking down, and there are 4 red laser beams on my chest. I look up, there are 4 officers with taser gun, and I think this is like when taser guns just came out, but they had them pointing at me. So I'm doing this, and at this point they're pulling everybody out of the cars, putting them all in the front yard, and not doing it nicely either. I had a lot of family come in from out of town or in the military, and these are women. I'm seeing them being officers grabbing them by the head, dragging them through the window, slamming them on their necks. They put us all on the porch. And then the older women, our grandmothers, and they're watching the babies. Now they're throwing smoke bombs in the house. So we had 3 elderly women pass out and 2 babies from the smoke. Then they started unleashing the automatic weapons on the house and the porch where all the kids were, younger than you. I was about your age, but now we're, the teenage boys, now we're like trying to shield the kids from the rubber bullets that are, being shot. And the story goes on and on. The New York Times actually just did another story about it about 3 months ago. But I started my answer by saying it was a tough question to answer because I still fear for my life. Yeah. Every time I see some blue lights behind me, I still fear for my. When I worked in Congress on Capitol Hill, there's nothing but officers. I can't tell you the anxiety I had every day at work. So I can't say I know there's a fix to the fear you have, but I'll say as a black man, this is what I did, and this is how I get through my day. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about being positive, just trying to make wise decisions. One thing my mother used to always tell me is that it doesn't matter how young you are, you'll always be treated like a man in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of someone wearing a badge. So all that, youthful offense stuff that, folks like to do, know that you may be treated like an adult if you decide to throw water balloons at a city bus. You may be treated like an adult, if you're, one thing we used to do is, if a car was passing, we'll throw a football over a car. I mean, kid stuff. But nowadays, that could cost you your life. So one of the things I did is that, and I don't recommend this for everybody, but I just tried to cut back on the youthful stuff, and I tried to just become the best version of myself possible. I changed the way I dress, from the baggy tee. I tried my best not to be profiled, and it's sad because we should be able to wear whatever we want and not be treated that way. But these are some of the things that I've done that help me and give me, I guess, a sense of peace. And I also think that it allows you to grow as a person a little bit too. And it caused me to shift more on my goals because I'll tell you, that one experience that I had on my graduation day is one of the reasons why I focus on criminal justice issues and politics so much now. And it's one of the reasons why I ran for Congress, because I want to, help reshape the way that, folks are policing our neighborhoods.
We'll need a mic.
Okay. Thanks.
My name is Teray Bennett, and our question is, we have a band of teachers who support us in and out of school. What is one support system you had that most people might not be aware of?
I missed the question. What was it? Say it again.
What is one support system you had that most people might not be aware of?
For me, it was sports, and it was just extracurricular activities. I didn't grow up with a man in the household, and I longed for the mentorship of a man because I was dealing with some things that my mother, as smart and as loving and as compassionate as she was, that she just couldn't help me with. And I knew that, men coach football. I knew that, the ROTC was headed by, a brother who drove a nice car and, he had a nice house. And I kind of wanted to be like him. So I found mentors. I found people at school and in the neighborhood and in the community that seemed to have the kind of life that I wanted to build for myself. And I joined whatever organization they were heading. And it seemed like just a way to pass time at the time. But looking back on it now, I recognize that those support systems probably saved my life, shaped the way I think today, gave me skills, gave me friends, and gave me lifelong mentors. So, and also jobs. I was a janitor at the National Guard when I started at 15, and my boss, he was a preacher. And every day he would talk to me about God. He would ask me what my thoughts were about God. And I thought we were just having informal conversations, in the break room, but little did I know he was forming the basis for my spirituality. That's a support system. Mm-hmm. So they're all around you. In our community, they may not be as obvious, but you find a positive activity, I guarantee you'll find a support system.
And I would say I agree. I think when you talk about family, your faith, and your friends, you have that support system. You can find that, right? But I do think it's really important for you to find mentors or people that you aspire to be like, even if you don't have that in your immediate sort of circle. For me, when I determined and decided that I wanted to be a prosecutor, I looked to Kamala Harris. She's now a U.S. Senator. She was the former San Francisco District Attorney, then the Attorney General of California. I studied everything about Kamala Harris. So I knew all of her programs, all of her initiatives, her books, everything that she did. I said, this is the type of prosecutor I want to be. And I didn't know her personally, but it was something that I took with me to aspire to become. After I won the election, I traveled all across the country to different district attorneys' offices to see what best practices we can employ in Baltimore City. And I got to meet Kamala Harris and her team. They sat with me and my team for 6 hours, and we talked about the various initiatives that we were going to implement, one of which was Aim to Be More in Baltimore. So I would just say that, you know, not everybody has the luck or has the support system that other people have within their immediate sort of circles. I would say you can also look outside of that to those that you might not necessarily know, but that you aspire to be like.
I want to add one thing. You just made me think of something. Because of the room we're in, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's annual legislative conference gave me my biggest support system in my professional life. I said earlier that I started off as an intern back in 2010. It gave me my jump start in politics. And I want all of you guys to start thinking, if you want a career in politics, public service, anything in that regard, I want you to take a look at the CBCF's website when you leave here, because they provide scholarships to college, paid internships on Capitol Hill with housing, the only program in the country to provide that for people of color. They also provide fellowships for those with graduate degrees. So fast forward, after I was an intern, the CBCF has been my main support system in DC. It has helped me get every job that I've gotten since being an intern. Every time I had to get a reference for a new job, I was calling on a former president at the CBCF or my former boss who could vouch for my work ethic or the skill set that I bring to the table. And I'll also say this, when I knew I wanted to run for Congress for a while, and the dream kind of became real a couple years ago at the CBCF's dinner, which is held in the room across the hall. In 2015, I became the first CBCF alum to speak at the dinner. And it was so real for me because I had never spoken for 4,000 people, and I'm in the back room, and they're getting me ready, and I go in the back, and Nia Long is standing right there, and yeah. So I'm like, and Lorenz Tate, he was one of my favorite actors growing up. And then, I look, and then President Obama is, standing a few feet away taking pictures with all these members of Congress. I didn't get to take a picture. But I'm just thinking about how, once again, I'm having a reflective moment of me washing dishes and now standing backstage, with these people. I went out, I gave a speech, and I did a decent job. I don't think Marilyn knows this, but the next day, her husband, Nick, found me on Facebook, and he sent me a long, long message talking about how similar our lives were, how similar our upbringings were, how much he enjoyed hearing me speak, and how it was it was important that I run for office one day, because the community that I came from needs me just like his community needed him. And he told me to always utilize him as a resource. 2.5 years later, he's one of the first people I called. And guess what? He picked up. And he stayed on the phone with me for an hour and talked me through all the things. Like, one, he asked me, "You think it's a good idea? Is this a time?" But, when I told him I was serious about it, he gave me good advice and good counsel throughout the entire process. So utilize the CBCF as a resource. Consider, even if you're not, interested in politics, get a scholarship. I mean, the network here, it's worked for me in ways I couldn't have even imagined. So.
Good afternoon. I'm kind of nervous, right? But, yeah.
Me too.
My name is Sincere Baker, but as a political leader, many don't see what goes on behind closed doors. And I just wanted to ask, what kind of adversity have you faced with your position before and during, as a colored male and female?
Adversity. I think I might have defined this. Let me just say. You know, like I said earlier, just being thrust into the international spotlight very early on was very eye-opening. And I can just say that, you know, this was pre-Trump. You know, after I charged those police officers, I had this group called Red Nation Rising that was following me on Twitter. They hacked my account. I had hate mail. I had death threats. There were obituary that was sent to my house about how my husband would be killed coming out of our house and no police would respond. We had a book of about this big of the hate mail and the death threats and the phone calls to my office. And now, like, we're kind of used to it, right? We're like, we laugh it off. Angela Rye's like, oh, the hell, go to hell, you racist, right? But, like, for me, that wasn't happening at the time in which I charged those officers, early 2015. So that was definitely something that posed a great deal of adversity, understanding how not to internalize that, right? It was really difficult because when they describe how, you know, you should be hung, how did you get in this position, affirmative action, or said something sexual about my position. So you got the misogynistic, racist, sexist, age. I mean, there's every level of isms involved. I think the hardest thing for me in that moment was to continue to think long term, right? Because then you start to second guess yourself. And I think that was eye-opening for me. I learned how not to internalize it. And it was thanks to my support system, my faith, my family, my friends. Kamala Harris, she called, you know, to check on me. But those types of adversities are gonna come in roles like this, right? I can remember when I first took office, it wasn't just Freddie Gray, it was, there was a homicide review commission that one of the professors wanted me to allow them to have access to open and pending homicide cases. And I said, absolutely not. This is Baltimore City, the home of stop snitching mentality, where it all began. Like, I already have a problem bringing victims and witnesses forward, and so no, you're not gonna be able to do that. The police commissioner was on the same page. The Baltimore Sun wrote articles for about 3 or 4 different articles about how I single-handedly derailed the Homicide Review Commission. NPR piled on by calling me scornful for not being on the same page as the police commissioner, even though we were, right? They then wrote an editorial entitled, "Play Nice, Miss Mosby." It's those types of misogynistic, racist sort of, you know, issues that you deal with on a daily sort of basis since the day that I stepped foot in office. And so for me, even in Freddie Gray, when my deputy, who is an older white male, he defended a motion in that case and he won. They described it as the savior who came in to defend me. Right? Like, you gotta think about the undertones of this type of, you know, message in the media. Never have they described or they refer to the males, which are newly elected male delegates, a whole crop of them, as scornful, or chastise them as children, or to say, play nice, miss, it's Mrs. Mosby, right? And never would they describe, if I had to go in and argue a motion, you know, me coming in and being the savior of this male counterpart. But it comes with the territory. And I guess the way that I'm able to get past it is to stay focused and to show my leadership. Because again, everything that I've said when it comes to police accountability reform, right? When I dropped the charges in the Freddie Gray case, so I can try this case 1,000 times, and without that police accountability reform, we'd end up in the same place. A week later, we had the Department of Justice report, confirmed everything that I said. You know, we had the GTTF, and I don't know if you guys know about that, where the officers were breaking into people's homes and ski masks and a whole bunch of corruption within the police department. So I think, like, in the end, if you stay focused and you show your leadership, it will show. But having to go through it, you have to learn how not to internalize it.
Hearing your question and then hearing her response, it reminded me of when I first started working on Capitol Hill. I would think probably a lot of the biggest adversities I've faced has been a result of being a young black male, right? Yeah, ageism is huge, and especially in this field. People always will tell you to wait your turn, pay your dues, and if you listen, 20 years will pass you by and you'll still be in the same position. When I came to Capitol Hill, there were not a lot of people of color at all. I mean, I think it must have tripled since the first time I've been there. But seeing that there were not that many people of color, you know, I mean, that's an adversity within itself. You know, the support system within an institution that wasn't founded to serve people like you and I was non-existent. I exerted some leadership, and this is what I recommend a lot of people do in the face of adversity. I'm a strength in numbers kind of guy, so one of the things I did, I saw that the Sisters on the Hill, they had a support group. I think it was called African American Women on the Hill. They met, I think, once or twice a month. And they had a large group. They would meet in one of those secluded rooms and on the Senate or House side. They would talk about the issues they were facing. They would have lunch. They would help each other with their resumes. They would share job opportunities. I mean, they would help one another rise within the ranks. They would help them get jobs off the Hill. If someone was applying to law school or grad school, someone who had already gone would help them with the application, you know, help pay for the LSAT. I mean, they had a well-oiled machine. So I decided we're going to create an African American Men on the Hill. And I was only like 24 at the time. I reserved a room and invited everyone I knew and told them, you know, tell a friend to tell a friend. Our very first meeting, we had 60 brothers in that room. I didn't even know 60 brothers worked on the Hill at the time, but we had 60 brothers show up. And that sort of formed the basis for a lot of what we see now on the Hill. There's a lot of other groups that you know, help with the professional development of, you know, young African-American staffers who are constantly passed over for jobs. There was a report that came out, I think just a week ago, talking about how diversity is still a huge issue. There are almost no African-Americans in senior leadership on the Senate side. Definitely like no, I think there might be 2 black women in senior positions in the entire U.S. Senate. And then on the House, it's not as bad, but it is still very bad. So in the face of adversities like that, I just recommend you step up to the plate. You know, reach down deep within you, find that leader, because there is a leader within us all. Find others who are like you and work together. I can't stress that enough. One other thing I'll say about working together. In order to work with people, you got to build a network. And this is a great place for networking. People come from all across the country to network during this conference. Young people in particular, you know, when I was an intern, everybody wants to network with the member of Congress. I want to meet the member. I want to meet the chief. I want to meet that person. And that's great. You know, a lot of times you'll find a mentor, but a lot of times you won't. Some of the best and greatest relationships you can make and some of the best networks you can build are with the people right next to you. I call it lateral networking, because guess what? if you're constantly striving to achieve your goal, and the person next to you is too, one day you're students. In 4 years, you're both college graduates. In 2 years, you both maybe have masters. A year after that, maybe one's an elected official, maybe one's the head of a nonprofit. A couple years after that, maybe you have another friend that opened a bank. It's important to build relationships with the people next to you, because you push each other, you balance each other's energy, and you can change the world eventually when you get to a place of of influence. And that's one of the things that I was able to do with my cohort as a CBCF intern. There was like 45 interns, and we all started off as as the lowest position one can have on the Hill. But 10 years later, I've run for Congress. Most of my other cohort members are attorneys, and they were able to make contributions to my campaign. I have friends that own that run nonprofits. I have friends that work at the foundation that help put this conference together. I have friends that work in the airline industry that can help get me a buddy pass if I'm too broke to go visit my mom. I mean, lateral networking is very, very important. So be sure to build that network as well.
And I would just add to that just quickly. It's really important for you to understand that when you take the initiative, other people are inspired by you, right? And you may not even know it, right? Like, you may attempt to do something, you may not be successful, but someone sees you in that position and they're inspired, and they are successful. Yeah. One of the things that after Freddie Gray and being in this role, I told you I represent 1% of all elected prosecutors in the country. But if you look all across the country right now, you see black women being elected as prosecutors all over the country. Kim Foxx, was subsequently elected. She came to me, she said, "Marilyn, you inspired me to run." Aramis Ayala is the first black state's attorney in Orlando, Florida, right? She said, "I was inspired to run. I saw you, I knew I could do it." You have Kim Gardner, you have Sherry Boston, you have, all of these people who are subsequently in these positions, and you don't do it because of that reason. Like, I didn't do it for that reason, but people were inspired. But once you're there, right, it is very important to have that support system. Understanding and recognizing that there's very few of us. We have a support system right now, and when we face adversity, we text each other, we call each other, we're there when we need just some advice or counsel, or even if we need to vent, because there's not a lot of us in these positions. But that's the importance of what you said, that networking, right? And ensuring that when it comes to these adverse situations, you have a network, a support system in place that, that can be helpful.
Great, that's actually a fantastic segue for what I wanted to talk a little bit more about today, which is the process of elections and running for office. And we have actually a question from Liberty's Promise here on that topic.
My question was, how do you plan to make sure that more black girls and women are given educational opportunities to put them in position to run for office?
So the one thing I can point out, and I would encourage you guys to kind of do your research too, but you have organizations that are actually doing it right now, right? You have Black Girls Vote. This is a young woman who is a friend of mine who started the organization. She's from Baltimore, where they are advocates within the community. They're setting agendas. They're ensuring that we're impressing the importance of that fundamental right. You have Emerge, is another women's organization in Maryland that is doing and putting and setting and training women to be in these elected positions. You have Emily's List, and it goes on and on and on. So there are organizations that are actually doing it. I would encourage you guys to look into them and to not be fearful, right? The first time when I decided to run, it was because I was at a women's conference on politics, and they asked the question. They were saying how, like, men, when it comes to applying for promotions, taking risks, right, they will take those risks when they only meet half of the qualifications. But women, on the other hand, we have to meet all of the qualifications before we even take the risk. So I asked myself at that point, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? So we can't second guess ourselves as women. And there are organizations that are in existence that can help you.
Great. We have another question from Liberty's Promise as well. One second.
Hi. I'm Sonata, and my question is, who are your role model in Baltimore, and what challenge they make you get through?
I didn't get it. You said, who is my
role model? Sorry.
My mother?
No.
Oh, my role model. My
Thank
role
you, guys.
model. It's okay. Before I answer that, Higher Heights too. That's another organization. Just came to my head. My role model, I think I said it. I think Kamala Harris was my role model from a distance. I did not know her, but I loved her. I read her book, Smart on Crime, and her approach, is something that I adopted and I implemented once I was in that position. But I read up on her, and I knew everything that she did and how she did it and how she got to the position in which she was, because that was my inspiration for doing the same thing. So that was a role model, externally from a distance. I would also say my mom and my grandma, that were my foundation. My mom had me very early. She had me at 17 years old, so we grew up like sisters. She struggled with substance abuse all of my childhood, and even despite that, she's still like the strongest woman I know. She's like retired police, has her own dancing school. She's a woman of faith, and like that kind of strength is something that is inspiring, right? And then my grandmother, who was the matriarch of our family. She graduated from high school, and she's probably one of the most brilliant women that I know, but she was also a product of her time. And she didn't go on and pursue her education. She could probably be an astrophysicist or whatever. Like, she's that brilliant. But because of the sacrifices that she made for her family, that's something that I respect. So that was somebody that inspired me to keep being positive and to try and obtain my goals. So those three women.
For me, a lot of my role models have been women. And a lot of people are shocked when is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. A lot of my mentors have been women, and a lot of people are shocked when they hear me say that. But I guess it started in the home. Watching my mother just do so much with so little was very inspiring to me, and it gave me no excuse but to. My mother never had a rule about what I was to do after high school. She didn't care whether I went to the Army or to college. She just said, "You're just gonna do something and get out of here." Whatever you do, just be the best at it. She was simple, be the best. So whatever I did, I was trying to be the best at it. As I found my way through politics, my next mentor was the woman I worked for, Congresswoman Brown, the woman I told you about who got us clean water. The more I learned about her, I learned about the impact that she had on her community. She's actually responsible for Florida having African American representation. Back in the early 90s, she sued the state of Florida, alleging that the way the legislature drew districts barred African Americans from becoming elected. The Supreme Court agreed. And from there, the court called for the legislators to draw, actually the court drew what are now called majority-minority districts, which increased the likelihood that African Americans would get elected. So after winning the case, in 1992, she was elected in Jacksonville, Carrie Meek was elected in Miami, and I think ALC Hastings was elected in West Palm Beach. And that was the first time Florida had African American members of Congress since 1871. Wow, look at this sister. So she was my next mentor, and she actually, when I interned in her office, I told her the story about how I remembered her coming in and helping us get clean. She took me under her wing. She taught me everything there was to know. She took me to all her meetings. She introduced me to all her friends. She prepared me. And then my next mentor was Shawnice. She's the president of the CBCF. When I worked at the CBCF, kind of like every other woman I've had the pleasure of working under, they just took a liking to me, and they, outside of my job duties, they would take the time to mentor me. Shawnice in particular, I didn't know how to balance a budget. When you grow up poor and you start making money, you don't know what to do with, a check. I used to make $20 to $30, out of the register growing up, and now I think my very first job, I think I was making about $42,000, which after taxes in DC and all, I think it was about $1,200 every 2 weeks, something like that, several years ago, and I didn't know what to do with it. And Shawnice helped me build my very first budget. She helped me open a savings account, a high yield savings account. I didn't even know what that was. And I still have that account to this day. The next mentor, I'll say, he is a man. He was a State Representative Alan Williams. He represented District 8 in Florida, Tallahassee. He took a chance on me. I came in his office. I came in as an intern, and his speechwriter had just quit. And he was like, well, I got to give a speech at this church on Sunday. The theme is Old Country Service. I'll let you take a crack at writing my speech. So I write the speech, about 10 pages, double space, size 18, whatever. And the very first line on the page is, there's a leak in this old building and my soul has got to move. Now, Alan's about 38 years old, and I guess they didn't play that song in his house because he didn't know what it was. He was like, what is this? He's like, this is the first thing you want me to say when I go to the mic? And I was like, yes, trust me. He said, well, if it don't work out, I don't know if your internship gonna work out. Monday, he comes in, he was like, man, play me that song. I said, why? He was like, I couldn't get through the first 2 words without the rest of the church standing on their feet and singing the song. And so he captured the attention of the entire church within the first 5 seconds, and I got brought on as a paid speechwriter as a result of that. And kind of like the other relationships I mentioned, it went beyond work. The more he learned about me and my story and how I got to his, from Washington distance to his office, man, I want to help you. So after work, now I'm going on all the fun meetings that he's, all the important dinners with important people that I never thought I'd get to have dinner with. I'm sitting in the back seat and I'm listening to the conversations being had in the front between him and other people. And that was almost a decade ago too. And he called me yesterday. He's still one of my mentors, and he's here right now. He wants to meet up for lunch. So yeah, those are the people that I looked up to. Those are people that prepared me for where I am today. I'm indebted to them, I would say that everyone in this room has an opportunity to be mentored, but also to be a mentor, because after these people paved the way for me, it now became my responsibility to mentor other people. To mentor people who are like me. It was one of the reasons why I coach football in Northeast DC. It's one of the reasons why I coach football in Tallahassee and in Jacksonville. In hopes that even if I want to connect with one kid that wants to, that is curious about life, but unsure about how to go about it, that is my opportunity to sow into someone else just like I was sown into, and I think that everyone has a duty to do that.
Great. We have about 10 more minutes for questions, so I want to make sure if you have any burning issues and requests, please raise your hand. I'm going to make my way around, make the question directed to a particular individual so we can kind of make sure we get through all the requests. And we have a question from Roosevelt first. One question.
Hi, Roosevelt again. In relation to that horrible, most tragifying situation that you mentioned earlier about the police violence that you experienced, we think that while to solve it or at least cure that or aid that kind of situation, we should build better relations between police and the community that they serve, instead of them being militarized, nameless, faceless people that gun down people like us, and the most that they suffer is a slap on the wrist or a leave. They should be people that we're intact with, people that we know, neighbors, you know. So what are your thoughts on, or how do you plan on building better relationship between the police and the community that they serve?
Yeah, and it took me a while to get to that point. The trauma of it all made me avoid police for several years, but early this year I had a breakthrough. Everybody seen Black Panther? Was that this year? I'm sorry. Oh, that was last year. That was this year, right? Okay, this year. So down in Jacksonville, we were down in Jacksonville, and I partnered with, I think she was a local prosecutor. I forgot her name, but it was a black woman who volunteered at an organization that served the youth who had interactions with the criminal justice system. And she had an idea that we should get these kids together and go see Black Panther because of the positive black male imagery. And we did that, but we took it a step further. After the movie, we brought in about 9 to 10 police officers from the community. I think they were all black men. Well, there was one black woman. There were, I think, yeah, all black men, one black woman on the police force. And then we brought in the former Lieutenant Governor, Jennifer Carroll, who's a black woman. We obviously had the local prosecutor there, and we had a couple other black women attorneys. And we started talking about the state of policing in the neighborhoods. And that was the first step towards building a relationship, because like these kids grew up and lived in the communities that those police drove through every day. And they were able to have candid conversations about how they police, why they police, what the laws are, how they're enforced, and it's candidly, kind of like you just said, what do I have to do to stay alive? Is there something about my community and my people that are so bad that every time I look on the TV or look in a newspaper, there's someone dying and there's nobody being held accountable for it. And we had a very fruitful discussion. I think the officers learned a lot from the kids, because kids, every generation grows up differently than the next. And, I don't understand, I'm only 30 and I don't understand my 16-year-old cousin. So surely a 40 or 50-year-old officer may have some of the same issues trying to connect with the youth. And that was one of the first opportunities that, we had to sort of bridge that gap. Did we solve every issue facing our community? No, but we built relationships. And it's funny because since that day, I've been to a few restaurants where I'll see some of those officers, and they'll remember me, and I'll remember them, and we'll talk. And I can only hope but think that they also run into some of those same kids, and they have the same positive interactions as well. And I think those are the type of steps we need to be taking, just opening the doors to having conversations, not always judging. We don't want to be judged by our hoodie, and they don't want to be judged by their badge. And I think it's important that sometimes we just strip all that away and look at each other as humans and just have conversations.
So when it comes to bettering police community engagement, I have a sort of personal perspective, just coming from my background. As I stated, my grandfather was one of the founding members of first black police organization in Massachusetts. And I didn't have really an appreciation for it until I was in Baltimore last year in a coffee shop. And this man walks up to me and he says, "Hey, aren't you the state's attorney?" I said, "Yeah, I am." He says, "I just want to thank you." I said, "Thank me for what?" He said, "I want to thank you for Mr. T." You see, I would come home, and I lived with my grandparents, and every time I came home, there was somebody new in my house, right? "Hey, cuz," I'm like, I don't even know you. Like, it was, my grandfather had a pool table, there were constantly people in our house. And I didn't understand it. Even when I was in law school, they had karaoke night, like on nights when I had tests and exams, and I didn't appreciate it. But in that coffee shop, he said, "I want to thank you for Mr. T." You see, Mr. T he said, I wouldn't be the man that I am today if it wasn't for your grandfather. And I know he passed, so I want to thank you. My grandfather was not just a paternal figure to me and my family, but he was a paternal figure to the community, right? And that's what we kind of lack, that sort of community police officer, somebody who's invested in their community. 80% of the police officers in Baltimore City do not live in Baltimore City. That's a problem. But my question to you and the young man next to you that was asking, what do? We know that this community policing is a problem all across the country. Why aren't we organizing? Why aren't we strategizing? Why aren't we implementing? Why aren't we ensuring that we are putting folks that look like you in these positions to be police officers, coming from these communities? That's the type of strategy that's needed, right? Having that seat at the table, ensuring that systemic reform that comes from within, and that you can touch your people and having an impact just like that man in the coffee shop, because my grandfather was at the table and ensuring that he was there and being a community police officer for everybody. So I think that's where we can kind of look at ourselves and ask, what are we doing? I know I've kind of had some self-reflection. How do I be as the prosecutor? I don't run the Baltimore Police Department. I don't run the police. I'm not the mayor. I'm the state's attorney, but I also feel like I have a role in that as well, right? So I created a community engagement division within my office. We have community liaisons, one that represents every police district. They go into the community. They're not only the face of the office into the community, but they're the voice of the community back to the office. I went to over 1,500. Me personally, I'm taking it on to myself to be able to break down those barriers of distrust. I went to over 1,500 community association churches and schools in 2 years. It's way more now. I have a program called the Junior State's Attorney Program. That's another one of my youth programs, where we essentially take 55 young people from across the city of Baltimore. We've done this for 4 years. And we start in the beginning of a criminal case, in the 911 call center, to the evidence control room, to the Foxtrot, Federal Circuit District Court, in the summertime when we complain about young people not having much to do. At the culmination of that 6 weeks, we do a mock trial competition at the University of Baltimore School of Law, where they can then see themselves as judges and prosecutors and police. We partnered with the mayor's office these past 2 years, and again, it's about developing those partnerships. So with the mayor's office of employment development, and we pay those young people to now be a part of this program. That's what you can do individually, but it's also about understanding the importance of how do we start to advocate? How do we start to strategize? How do we start to implement? Yeah.
Okay, I promise one more question to Dunbar, and then I actually have to wrap up. This is awesome that everyone has such great questions.
Hello. Hello, my name is Richard, and my question is, they say hindsight is 20/20. Looking back on your past when you were in high school, what advice would you give us as high schoolers to help us in our future?
Great final question, actually.
One thing I wish I would have did in high school, there's a few things I wish I would have done. I just tell you all of them. I could have done a whole lot better academically. I didn't apply myself as well, and I graduated with honors, but I remember sitting at my graduation, listening to the valedictorian give their speech, knowing that it should have been me. And that kind of carried over into college and even into graduate school. That was a bad habit I learned, like not fully applying myself. I think I had 4.0 potential, but I always hovered around, 3.1. I sold myself short. It didn't cost me a whole lot in high school because I still ended up with a full ride to Florida A&M, but it did cost me in grad school. I am drowning in student loan debt as a result of me not taking my studies as seriously as I should have. I didn't understand what student loan debt meant. Once again, going back to financial literacy, when you I mean, nobody in my family knew what a student loan was. So I thought it was free money. It's not. They want their money back when you're done. So all the money that I could have to go towards starting a business or buying my first home in this DC market, I'm still paying off student loans. So that's the first thing, taking your studies more seriously. Another thing is, and I think there's a lot of pressure on a lot of people to be cool. Everybody wants to be looked at a certain way. Everybody want to be the most popular. And a lot of people will lose their identity in the midst of that. For instance, in Florida, it's a football state. And in my community, we were state champions. I mean, we went undefeated every year. It was very hard to get a starting spot on our football team. And I liked football. I knew I didn't have any dreams of playing in the NFL, and I did start, but I spent most of my time, chasing a football dream that I didn't even want. And in the midst of that, I gave up something I was really, really good at. I was a state championship snare drummer. I had dreams of playing in the Marching 100 at FAMU. And looking back on that, I never got to put on that uniform because I gave up playing the drums in high school because it was cooler to play football. And there's nothing wrong with playing football, but I probably should have just followed my passion and said, I was in football for the wrong reasons. Then I guess the last thing I would say is, and I guess I couldn't have known that until now, but it's get a strong understanding of financial literacy. Too many of our families, they don't come from much. So, I mean, they can't teach what they can't know. But for those who do make it out of, low-income households and, do go on to get a college degree, they make a lot of foolish decisions like me that, could have been handled differently had, I known to seek out advice on the financial literacy front. I'll give you a couple examples. I messed my credit up early in college. I got a credit card, and the first thing and I remember like it was yesterday, it is a little $300 limit Capital One card. The first thing I did, I went to McDonald's, and just to see if it would work. I ordered, the Big Mac meal. I just want to see if it worked, and they gave me a number one through the drive-thru. I was like, wow, free money, So I kept using it, maxed it out, got another card, maxed it out, just thinking it was free money. And this is only $800 total. But it was hard to pay that back. It took me a couple years to pay that back because I was broke in college. But not understanding how interest rates work, it took me a while. I did the same thing with a car. And I actually did this when I was coaching you, Keyshawn. I had a perfectly working car, nice little Ford Focus, wasn't the coolest thing. But one of my friends came up from Florida in a black Dodge Challenger, brand new. So what did I do? I went to Coons in Silver Spring, got me a brand new Ford Mustang. I wanted to look cool, man. I wanted to look cool, and I was young. I'm in DC. I want to pull up at brunch, looking a certain type of way. What I didn't know was that I had a bad interest rate on my loan. And that's something that some people are taught early on in high school, but I wasn't. And I did the same thing with furnishing my first apartment. I did, those 90-day cash options. I thought that I would just pay off the value of the furniture over a certain period of time. But what I didn't know is that after 90 days, it doubles. So I'll say this. I said all that to say this. I made a lot of poor financial decisions early in my 20s that, luckily I've been able to correct because at 25 I got really serious. I sought out Shawnice, who's like my financial literacy mentor, and she taught me a whole bunch of stuff. But if you can learn this stuff now, learn how to manage a budget and manage your books and just make wise decisions, save, pay yourself first now, that's a tool that will really, really benefit you and your family as an adult.
So I'll briefly say that I think you should make the investment now and understand if you put in the work and the time and the commitment now and you prepare, it's going to put you in the best position. Your life expectancy, I don't know what it is, but what? If we say it's 80, right? You put in that time and that energy and really focusing on these, how many years? Undergrad is only 4 years. You all are 11th and 12th graders. When I was in high school, that's where I just had laser focus. I didn't do all that great the first 2 years, but I was laser focused that 11th and 12th grade year because I wanted to set myself up. I just came from an event, and one of the judges was telling, I swore in assistant state's attorneys, and she advised them to level up. That's what I would encourage you to do. Level up. You're in the 11th and 12th grade. These are the most important years to show your commitment in those colleges, right? That you're serious about who you are and what you want to become. You put yourself, you level up, so then when you get into college, it's 4 years. 4 years. And if you decide that you want to go on to graduate school, that's literally, law school's only 3. So that's 7 years, right? And if you think about your life expectancy, you put in that time, that effort for 7 years, and you set the standard for the way you're going to live your life for the next 60. It's worth the investment. So it's a matter of you leveling up.
Level up.
So of course I knew that all these wonderful insights and nuggets couldn't possibly be in their bio. So I really want to spend this last few minutes we have here to kind of thank various people who are basically enabled today to happen, enabled you to be here today. So first off, I really want to make sure we thank our fantastic, inspiring, awe-inspiring speakers today. I think we're so fortunate, we're so lucky to have them as our leaders. I know for myself, I'm just kind of a little bit speechless, really, by the kinds of lives and the kinds of purpose and the kinds of inspiration. I mean, basically, laser focus with which you lived your lives and your relationships. So I really want to give both of our speakers, State Attorney Marilyn Mosley, and Mr. Rontel Beatty, a big round of applause.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. While some of you are standing, I want to actually also ask all the educators in the room, the teachers, the coordinators who helped make today happen stand. I want to recognize you as well. And I saved the best for last. I want all the students in the room, intern students, to stand up, and I want to applaud you as well. So I left a few minutes for you all to be able to meet our speakers, take some photographs if you'd like. I also want to make sure that you all head to the exhibit hall after this, because there's a lot of resources for young people there. Scholarship programs, volunteers, organizations as well that could interest your, basically, this conversation today. Thank you again for all being here.
All right, so I'm gonna take a selfie and I'm gonna send it to Nick. He's like, he sent me a text like, are you still there? And I was like, yeah, I'm still here.